29 years, 11 months, and 18 days. That's how much life Evan Hale had lived before he realized he was about to lose everything. Not to death, not to disaster, but to a single piece of paper signed decades ago by a grandfather he barely remembered. A will with one impossible condition: marry and produce an heir by 30, or watch strangers carve up the only home he'd ever known. 12 days remained. No prospects. No plan. Just a man, alone on 100 acres of olive trees, counting down to his own extinction. Stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this journey travels. The valley didn't care about deadlines. Evan Hale stood at the eastern ridge of his property just before dawn, watching fog roll through the olive groves like something alive and deliberate. The trees stretched in perfect rows down the hillside, 700 acres of silver-green leaves that had stood here longer than he'd been breathing, longer than his father had lived, longer than most marriages lasted, which was ironic considering what was about to cost him everything. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He ignored it. He knew what it said without looking. The same thing it had said every morning for the past 2 weeks. 12 days remaining. Please confirm compliance with estate conditions. Automated, impersonal, legally airtight. Evan was 29 years, 11 months, and 18 days old. In 12 more days, he would turn 30, and if he remained unmarried and childless, the Hale estate, all 700 acres, the main house, the processing facilities, the century-old rootstock, everything would transfer automatically to his father's cousins. People he'd met exactly twice in his life. People who'd already hired a commercial real estate firm to begin surveying the land for subdivision. They'd sent him the preliminary drawings, luxury homes, a boutique hotel, wellness retreat. They'd even suggested he could buy one of the parcels if he wanted to stay connected to his heritage. Evan had burned those drawings in the stone fireplace of the main house, watching the glossy paper curl and blacken, and felt absolutely nothing. That was the problem, wasn't it? Feeling nothing had become his most practiced skill. The sun broke over the ridge, turning the fog gold. Somewhere down the hill, he heard the workers arriving, truck engines, Spanish voices calling to each other, the metallic clang of equipment being unloaded. The estate employed 43 people full-time, more than twice that during harvest. They'd been with the Hales for generations, some of them. Their children grew up in the same cottages their grandparents had occupied. In 12 days, they'd all be looking for new jobs. Evan turned away from the view and walked back toward the main house. It sat at the crown of the hill, a sprawling Spanish colonial with white stucco walls and a red tile roof. His grandfather had built it in 1952. His father had died in it in 2009 when Evan was 12. His mother had lasted 3 more years before the cancer took her too. After that, there'd been nobody. Just Evan and the lawyers and a trust fund large enough to maintain the property, but not large enough to make him feel anything resembling secure. Just Evan and the trees and the crushing weight of a legacy he'd never asked for, but couldn't bear to abandon. The house echoed when he entered. It always echoed. 12,000 square feet of terracotta floors and exposed beam ceilings, and rooms he never opened. He'd closed off the entire west wing after his mother died. No point heating spaces nobody used. He went to the kitchen, the only room that felt remotely livable, and started coffee. While it brewed, he finally looked at his phone. 17 missed calls, 9 voicemails, 43 text messages, all from his lawyer, Richard Stenholm. Evan didn't bother listening to the voicemails. He knew what Richard wanted. The same thing he'd wanted for 6 months, ever since they'd unearthed the clause in his grandfather's will that had been quietly ticking like a time bomb through Evan's entire childhood. Get married. Have a child. Save the estate. Simple. Straightforward. Completely impossible. The coffee finished brewing. Evan poured it black, drank it standing at the window overlooking the groves. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. Tall, lean, dark-haired. His mother's green eyes, his father's sharp jawline. Handsome enough, he supposed, though he'd never particularly cared. What good was appearance when you had the social skills of a fence post? His phone rang again. Richard, obviously. Evan answered on the 4th ring. I'm not getting married in 12 days, Richard. Then you're losing the estate. Richard's voice was clipped, professional. They'd had this conversation so many times it had become a script. The cousins have already lined up buyers. The moment you turn 30 without meeting the conditions, I know the conditions. Then do something about them. For the first time, frustration cracked through Richard's professional veneer. Evan, I've known you since you were 14 years old. I watched your parents build this place into something extraordinary. Are you really going to let it die because you're too stubborn to what? Marry a stranger? Knock her up and hope it sticks before my birthday? Evan's voice was flat. That's what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting you explore your options. I don't have options. Options require time and social connections and the ability to interact with other human beings without wanting to crawl out of my own skin. Evan set his coffee down harder than he intended. I'm not built for this, Richard. I never have been. Silence on the other end, then quieter. Your grandfather put that clause in the will for a reason. Yeah, to torture me posthumously. He did a great job. He wanted the estate to continue, to have a future beyond just maintenance. Richard sighed. He wanted you to have a family, Evan, to not be alone. Well, he should have been more specific about the timeline. Evan ended the call before Richard could respond. He stood there in the silent kitchen, surrounded by copper pots he never used, and a table that sat 12 but had only ever seated one, and felt the familiar numbness settle over him like a blanket. This was fine. He was fine. He'd always been fine alone. The lie was so practiced he almost believed it. By mid-morning, the heat had already turned oppressive. Northern California in late August didn't mess around. The valley trapped heat like a stone oven, and by noon the temperature would push past 100 degrees. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer, that turned the olive groves into a hazy dreamscape. Evan spent the morning doing what he always did, avoiding the administrative offices where his estate manager, Carlos, ran the actual business of olive oil production. Instead, he walked the groves alone, checking irrigation lines, examining trees for signs of disease, doing physical labor that required his hands but not his heart. It was easier this way. Always had been. He was 3 rows deep in the southern grove when he heard shouting. Not angry shouting, panicked. Multiple voices, high and urgent, coming from the direction of the main gate. Evan's first instinct was to ignore it. The workers knew how to handle problems. They didn't need him hovering. But something in the tone made him pause, made him change direction and head toward the commotion. The main gate stood at the end of a long gravel drive lined with mature eucalyptus trees. It was ornamental iron, 12 feet tall, kept locked during working hours. Beyond it, the county road stretched empty in both directions. Except today, someone stood on the other side of the gate. A young woman, maybe 25, leaning heavily against the iron bars. Her clothes were filthy, jeans torn at the knees, a tank top that might have been white once but was now gray with road dust. Her dark hair hung in tangled ropes around her face. She was drenched in sweat, breathing hard, gripping the gate like it was the only thing keeping her upright. 2 of the workers, Miguel and his younger brother Tomas, stood on the estate side of the gate, arguing with her in rapid Spanish. No hay trabajo, Miguel was saying. No tenemos, please. The woman's voice cut through, English, desperate. I just need a chance. Any work, anything at all. I can pick, I can process, I can clean, I don't care. We're not hiring, Tomas said, his English better than his brother's. You need to leave. I can't. She was shaking now, Evan realized. Not from fear, from exhaustion. I walked 14 miles. I don't have gas money. I don't have anywhere to go. Please, I just need... You need to leave, Miguel repeated, firmer now. This is private property. Evan stood 30 feet back, hidden in the shadow of the eucalyptus trees. He should have revealed himself, should have stepped in, made an executive decision, but he couldn't make himself move. He'd seen people like this before, desperate, down on their luck, looking for salvation in a job that probably wouldn't save them anyway. The humane thing would be to help, to open the gate, offer water, maybe some cash for gas. But Evan had learned a long time ago that helping people meant letting them in, and letting people in meant getting hurt when they inevitably left. Better to stay closed, safer. He was turning to leave when he saw it happen. An elderly woman, Rosa, who'd worked in the house since before Evan was born, appeared from the direction of the workers' cottages, carrying a basket of laundry. She was 73, stubborn as granite, and absolutely refused to retire no matter how many times Evan suggested it. She made it 3 steps before her knee buckled. Rosa went down hard, the basket flying, white sheets scattering across the gravel. She didn't cry out. Rosa never did. But Evan saw the pain flash across her face, saw her grab her knee with both hands. Miguel and Tomas started toward her, but the woman at the gate was faster. Evan didn't see how she got through. Later, he'd learned she'd climbed over 12 feet of ornamental iron with spikes on top. But suddenly she was there, on her knees beside Rosa, gentle hands already assessing the damage. "Don't move," she said quietly. "Let me look. Does it feel dislocated or just strained?" Rosa stared at her, bewildered. "I'm nobody, but I've seen a lot of knee injuries. Can you straighten it?" Rosa tried, winced, shook her head. Okay, that's fine." The young woman looked up at Miguel and Tomas, who'd finally reached them. "Do you have ice? And something for compression? An ace bandage, even just a clean towel?" "Who the hell are you?" Miguel demanded. "Someone who's not going to watch an old woman suffer when I can help." She turned back to Rosa. "I'm going to support your leg while they get supplies, all right? Just breathe. You're going to be fine." Her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. There was nothing performative about it. No playing to an audience, no angling for sympathy. She just helped. Because she could. Evan felt something crack open in his chest. Some small, calcified piece of the armor he'd spent 17 years building. He stepped out of the shadows. "Miguel, get the first aid kit from the processing building. Tomas, call Dr. Reyes. Tell him it's for Rosa." He walked forward slowly, watching the young woman's head snap up at the sound of his voice. "And someone bring water. She looks half dead." The young woman's eyes met his. They were brown, he noticed. Dark and exhausted, and completely unafraid. "I don't need water," she said. "She does. She'll get it, so will you." "I'm fine." "You're not." Evan crouched down beside her, careful to keep his distance. "You climbed a 12-foot gate in 100-degree heat after walking 14 miles. You're dehydrated, probably hypoglycemic, and definitely certifiable. Drink the water when it comes, or I'll have Miguel drag you to the clinic himself." Something flickered in her expression, not quite a smile. Almost. "Are you always this bossy with strangers?" she asked. "Only when they break into my property to perform emergency medical care on my employees." "I didn't break in. I climbed. There's a difference." "Not legally. Morally, though." This time she definitely almost smiled. Then Rosa made a soft sound of pain, and the woman's attention snapped back instantly. Hey, stay with me. The supplies are coming. You're doing great." Tomas returned with water bottles, an ice pack, and an elastic bandage. The young woman worked quickly, efficiently, wrapping Rosa's knee with the kind of practiced confidence that only came from experience. When she finished, she helped Rosa shift into a more comfortable position and stayed there, one hand on the old woman's shoulder, murmuring reassurances in halting Spanish. Evan watched all of this from 3 feet away, struck by how present she was, how completely focused. When was the last time he'd seen someone give that kind of attention to another person? When was the last time he'd been capable of it himself? Dr. Reyes arrived 20 minutes later, examined Rosa, and confirmed what the young woman had already diagnosed: a severe strain, not a dislocation, but Rosa would be off her feet for at least 2 weeks. "She did good work," Dr. Reyes said quietly to Evan, nodding toward the young woman who'd retreated to sit in the shade of the eucalyptus trees. "Textbook stabilization. You hire a new medic?" "No," Evan said. "She just appeared." "Huh." Dr. Reyes packed up his bag. "Well, whoever she is, she knows what she's doing." After Rosa had been helped to her cottage and the excitement died down, Evan found the young woman still sitting under the trees, drinking water in small, careful sips. She looked like she might pass out at any moment. He sat down on the opposite end of the bench without asking permission. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "You walked 14 miles, Evan finally said. 15, actually. I miscalculated. In August, in the valley heat. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has choices." She turned to look at him then, really look at him, and Evan felt weirdly exposed under that gaze. "Do they?" she asked quietly. "Because from where I'm sitting, choices are a luxury most people can't afford." He didn't have an answer for that. "What's your name?" he asked instead. She hesitated, like giving her name meant something, like it cost something. "Maya," she said finally. "Maya Collins." "Evan Hale." "I know. I asked around before I walked up here." She took another sip of water. "You own all of this?" "Legally. For another 12 days, anyway." He had no idea why he said it. He never talked about the clause and never mentioned the deadline, but something about her made the words slip out before he could stop them. Maya's eyebrows rose. 12 days? Long story. Not a good one. Most long stories aren't. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I really do need work. Any work. I'm not picky." "Why here?" "Because I heard you treat your workers fairly, pay living wages, provide housing. That's rare. It's just decent business." "It's more than that." She met his eyes again. "Look, I'm not going to beg. I don't do that. But I'm asking, person to person, I need a job. I'm a hard worker. I learn fast. I don't cause problems. If you give me a chance, I'll prove it." "What's your experience?" "Agricultural work? None. But I've done restaurant management, retail, factory assembly, warehouse logistics, and I spent 6 months as a CNA at a nursing home, which is where I learned the medical stuff." She said it without pride or shame, just facts. "I'm good with my hands and better with numbers. I don't complain, and I don't quit." "Why do you need work so badly?" Her jaw tightened. "That's personal." "So is hiring someone." For a long moment, she didn't answer. Evan waited. He was good at waiting. It was one of the few social skills he'd mastered, silence. Finally, Maya exhaled slowly. "My mother has stage 4 cancer. The treatments aren't covered by insurance. I've been working 3 jobs to pay for them, but I lost 2 of them when I had to take time off to care for her. I need steady work with steady pay, and I need it now before the bills bury us both." The words were clinical, detached, the same way Evan talked about the estate clause, like if you didn't let emotion into it, it couldn't hurt you. He recognized the armor because he wore the same kind. "The work is hard," he said. "Physical. 10-hour days minimum during harvest season." "I can handle hard." "The pay is fair, but not generous." "I don't need generous. I need consistent." "Worker housing is available, but it's basic, shared facilities." "I don't care about basic. I care about a roof." Evan studied her. Really studied her. She was exhausted, filthy, running on fumes. But there was steel underneath, the kind of strength that didn't come from privilege or protection, the kind you only developed from surviving things that should have broken you. He made a decision. "There's a cottage on the east side of the property," he said. "Hasn't been used in 2 years, but it's structurally sound. Private bathroom, small kitchen. If you can clean it up, it's yours." Maya's breath caught. "You're hiring me?" "I'm offering you a trial. 1 month. You work hard, you learn fast, you prove you can handle the job, it becomes permanent. You slack off or cause problems, you're gone. No second chances." "I don't need second chances." She was sitting straighter now, exhaustion temporarily forgotten. "I just need the first one." "Then you've got it." Evan stood up, brushed dust from his jeans. "Carlos Mendoza is the estate manager. Find him at the administrative office. Tell him I sent you. He'll get you sorted with paperwork and show you the cottage." Maya stood too, swaying slightly before catching herself. "Thank you. You won't regret this." "I might," Evan said honestly, "but I guess we'll find out." He turned to leave. "Mr. Hale?" He looked back. Maya was standing there in her filthy clothes, her tangled hair, her desperate circumstances, and she was smiling. Actually smiling, like he'd just handed her the world instead of a trial position with basic housing. 12 days, she said. "Whatever happens in 12 days, I hope you figure it out." Evan didn't know how to respond to that, didn't know how to explain that there was nothing to figure out, that the deadline was immovable and the conditions were impossible, and he'd already made peace with losing everything. So he just nodded and walked away, feeling those brown eyes on his back the whole time. He didn't know it yet, couldn't possibly have known, but in 12 days, Maya Collins would turn his entire world inside out. And it would start with a single, desperate question. The sun was setting when Evan finally returned to the main house. The heat had broken slightly, replaced by the kind of golden hour light that made the valley look almost magical, almost peaceful. He stood on the terrace overlooking the groves and allowed himself one moment of honesty. He was terrified, not of losing the estate. He'd made peace with that months ago, or at least convinced himself he had. No, what terrified him was the after. What came next when the land was gone and the workers were scattered and the house was empty? What did Evan Hale become when he wasn't the last heir to the Hale estate? Just a man, alone, with nothing to protect him from the crushing weight of his own isolation. The thought made his chest tight. His phone buzzed. Another message from Richard. "We need to talk. Call me." Evan deleted it without reading the rest. Downstairs he heard voices. Carlos and some of the workers, probably discussing the day's harvest numbers. Normal sounds, everyday sounds, sounds that would be gone in 12 days. He should go down, should check in, ask questions, be present. Instead, he went to his room, closed the door, and stood at the window watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere on the east side of the property, Maya Collins was probably settling into her cottage, unpacking whatever meager belongings she'd carried with her, starting to build a life that would last exactly 1 month before she'd have to leave too, when the estate changed hands and new owners brought their own workers. He wondered if she knew that, if she understood she was just buying time, same as him. Probably. She seemed smart. Too smart for this place, honestly. Evan's reflection stared back at him from the dark window, a ghost of a man in a ghost of a house, counting down to his own obsolescence. 11 days, 23 hours, and 42 minutes. The clock kept ticking, and Evan Hale kept standing there, alone, exactly where he'd always been, where he'd probably always be. Maya's first morning started at 4:30, when the valley was still black and the air held a whisper of coolness that would vanish by 7. She'd been awake since 3, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar cottage, her mind racing through everything she needed to prove in the next 30 days. The cottage was smaller than her mother's hospital room, but felt like a palace. 1 bedroom, a bathroom that actually had hot water, and a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove she'd already scrubbed until it gleamed. The previous occupant had left behind a mattress and a wobbly table. Maya had found clean sheets in a storage closet and made the bed with military precision, the way her mother had taught her when she was 7, and they'd lived in their car for 6 months. "You take care of what you have," her mother always said, "because you never know when it might be all you get." Maya dressed in the only clean work clothes she owned, jeans she'd washed in the sink last night, and a long-sleeved shirt to protect against the sun. Her hands were already blistered from yesterday's climb over the gate, but she wrapped them carefully and pulled on gloves she'd borrowed from the supply shed. Carlos had told her to report to the processing facility at 5. She arrived at 4:45. The building was a long, low structure of corrugated metal and concrete, humming with machinery even at this hour. Inside, 3 workers were already moving through the morning's first tasks, sorting yesterday's harvest, checking oil levels, preparing equipment. They looked up when Maya entered, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. "You're early," Carlos said, appearing from a back office with a clipboard. He was maybe 50, compact and weathered, with the kind of face that had seen everything twice and wasn't easily impressed. "I don't believe in being late," Maya said. "Good. Because here, late means lost money. Lost money means lost jobs." He gestured for her to follow him. "You ever worked a processing line?" "No, but I'm a fast learner." "We'll see." Carlos led her to a sorting table where olives moved along a conveyor belt in a continuous stream. "Your job is quality control. Bad olives, damaged ones, anything that looks diseased or wrong, you pull it. Good ones stay on the belt. You'll be doing this for 10 hours today with 2 15-minute breaks and 30 minutes for lunch. Think you can handle that?" Maya looked at the belt, the endless flow of small green and black fruit, and felt something settle in her chest. This was concrete. This was simple. Pull the bad ones, leave the good ones. She could do this. "Yes," she said. "Then get to work." The first hour was easy. The second was harder. By the third, Maya's back ached from standing, her eyes burned from the concentration, and her wrapped hands screamed inside the gloves. But she didn't slow down, didn't complain, just kept pulling bad olives, her movements becoming automatic, almost meditative. Around 7, when the sun had fully risen and the building had heated to an uncomfortable warmth, Evan Hale appeared. Maya saw him before he saw her. He moved through the facility like a ghost, barely acknowledged by the workers who'd probably grown used to his silent inspections. He checked equipment, examined yesterday's oil production numbers posted on a whiteboard, spoke briefly to Carlos in a voice too low for Maya to hear. Then his eyes found her across the processing floor. He didn't approach, just watched her work for maybe 30 seconds, his expression unreadable. Maya kept her hands moving, refused to be intimidated by the weight of that gaze. If he was looking for her to falter, he'd be disappointed. Finally, Evan nodded once, to her or to himself, Maya couldn't tell, and left. "He doesn't usually come down here this early," said the woman working the belt beside Maya. Her name was Teresa, and she'd been kind enough to show Maya where the bathroom was during the first break. "Must be checking up on you." "Does he do that with all new hires?" Maya asked. Teresa laughed. "We haven't had a new hire in 3 years. He doesn't like change much, Mr. Hale. Doesn't like people much either, if I'm being honest. But he's fair, and he pays on time, and he doesn't mess with our benefits. That's more than most owners can say." "What happened to him?" The question slipped out before Maya could stop it. "Why is he like that?" Teresa's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "That's not my story to tell. But I'll say this. When you lose everyone you love before you're old enough to drive, you either learn to let people in or you learn to keep them out. Mr. Hale chose the second one." Maya thought about that for the rest of the morning, her hands moving automatically while her mind circled around the image of a boy losing his parents, inheriting a kingdom he never asked for, and building walls so high nobody could reach him. She understood walls. She'd built her own. By lunch, Maya had pulled 2,347 defective olives. She knew because she'd counted them, unable to help herself. Numbers had always been her refuge, concrete, reliable, unchanging. She ate alone under a eucalyptus tree, the lunch she'd packed that morning already warm from the heat. A peanut butter sandwich and an apple she'd found in the cottage's tiny refrigerator, probably left by the previous occupant months ago. The apple was mealy but edible. Maya ate it anyway. Waste was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. "You always eat alone?" Maya looked up to find a young man standing a few feet away, maybe early 20s, with an easy smile and curious eyes. He held a lunchbox decorated with cartoon characters. "First day?" Maya said. "Don't really know anyone yet." "I'm Tomas. I was one of the guys at the gate yesterday when you, climbed over." His smile widened. "That was pretty badass, by the way. Miguel's still mad about it." "Tell Miguel I'm sorry for the dramatic entrance." "Don't be sorry. It's the most interesting thing that's happened around here in months." Tomas sat down without asking permission, immediately launching into the kind of easy conversation Maya hadn't experienced in years. He told her about growing up on the estate, about his family's 3 generations of work here, about the upcoming harvest that would be the biggest in 5 years if the weather held. Maya listened, asked questions, and tried not to think about how all of this would disappear in 11 days when Evan Hale lost his estate and new owners brought new workers. "So what's your story?" Tomas asked eventually. "How does someone end up walking 15 miles in August heat to apply for a job?" Maya took a drink from her water bottle, buying time. "Needed work. Heard this was a good place." "That's the short version. What's the real version?" "That is the real version." "Come on, nobody walks 15 miles without a serious reason." Maya met his eyes. "My mother's dying. Medical bills are burying me. I lost my other jobs and needed something steady before we both end up on the street. Happy now?" Tomas's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine." Maya stood up, brushing crumbs from her jeans. "I should get back to work." She left before he could apologize again, before the sympathy in his eyes could crack the careful control she'd spent years building. Sympathy was dangerous. Sympathy made you soft, made you believe someone might actually help, and then when they didn't, when they couldn't, the disappointment hurt worse than the original problem. better to stay hard. 2. Stay focused. Stay alone. The afternoon stretched endless and brutal. The temperature inside the processing facility climbed past 100 degrees despite the industrial fans. Maya's vision swam, her hands moved on autopilot, and twice she had to stop and breathe through waves of dizziness that threatened to pull her under. But she didn't stop working, didn't ask for extra breaks, just kept pulling bad olives while sweat soaked through her shirt and her body screamed for relief. At 3 o'clock, Carlos appeared at her station with a bottle of electrolyte solution. "Drink this," he said. "All of it. Now." Maya's hands were shaking too badly to unscrew the cap. Carlos did it for her, his expression stern. "You don't get points for killing yourself on day one," he said quietly. "Pride is worthless if you're unconscious on my floor. Understand?" Maya drank. The solution tasted like artificial orange and shame. "I can handle it," she said when she'd finished half the bottle. "I'm sure you can, but handling it and proving it are different things. You've already proven you're tough. Now prove you're smart enough to know your limits." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Maya standing there with the half-empty bottle and a throat suddenly tight with something that felt dangerously close to gratitude. When her shift finally ended at 6, Maya stumbled back to her cottage in the golden evening light, every muscle in her body screaming. She made it as far as the bathroom before her legs gave out. She sat on the floor tiles, still cool from the day's heat, and let herself shake. 1 day down, 29 to go. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from the hospital. Her mother's next treatment was scheduled for Friday. Cost $8,400. Insurance coverage $0. Maya closed her eyes and did the math she'd done 1,000 times before. Her first paycheck wouldn't come for 2 weeks. Even if she picked up every available overtime hour, even if she didn't eat, didn't spend a penny on anything else, she'd still be $3,000 short. The numbers didn't work. They never worked. But she'd figure it out. She always figured it out. She had to. Later, after she'd showered and forced herself to eat the other half of the peanut butter sandwich, Maya sat at her wobbly table and opened her laptop, the one luxury she'd refused to sell, no matter how desperate things got. She pulled up the spreadsheet she'd been maintaining for 18 months, the one that tracked every dollar coming in and going out, every payment plan and negotiated rate, and desperate phone call to billing departments. The numbers glowed on the screen, neat and orderly and absolutely devastating. Her mother had maybe 4 months left. The oncologist had been clear about that, even as he'd outlined the treatment plan that might give her 6. But 6 months of treatment cost more than Maya would make in a year. More than she'd make in 2 years. The math was impossible. The situation was impossible. But Maya had learned a long time ago that impossible just meant you hadn't found the right angle yet. She was still staring at the spreadsheet when someone knocked on her door. Maya opened it to find Rosa standing on the small porch, leaning heavily on a cane and holding a covered dish. "You shouldn't be walking," Maya said immediately. "Your knee." "My knee is fine. Dr. Reyes cleared me for light activity." Rosa's English was accented but precise. "May I come in?" Maya stepped back, suddenly conscious of how bare the cottage was, how obviously temporary. Rosa didn't seem to notice or care. She set the dish on the table and removed the cover, revealing some kind of casserole that smelled like heaven. "You didn't eat enough today," Rosa said. "Teresa told me. A peanut butter sandwich and a bad apple is not food for someone working 10-hour shifts. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running on fumes and stubbornness." Rosa's dark eyes were sharp. "I know because I did the same thing when I was your age. Nearly killed myself trying to prove I was strong enough. Someone finally told me that accepting help isn't weakness. I'm telling you the same thing now." Maya's throat went tight again. "I don't know how to repay you." "You already did. You helped me when you had nothing to gain from it, when most people would have walked past." Rosa moved toward the door, moving carefully on her injured knee. "The casserole is chicken and rice. There's enough for 3 days if you're sensible. The dishes are mine, so wash them and bring them back when you're done." "Rosa, eat, child, get strong, and stop trying to carry the world by yourself." Rosa paused at the door, looking back with something that might have been understanding. "We all need help sometimes. That's not failure, that's just being human." After Rosa left, Maya stood in her tiny cottage, staring at the casserole and trying Very hard not to cry. She'd spent so long keeping people at arm's length, convinced that needing help was the same as being weak, that she'd forgotten what kindness felt like. It felt terrifying. It felt like hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing of all. The next 3 days passed in a blur of heat and repetition. Maya worked her 10-hour shifts, pulled her thousands of defective olives, and slowly stopped feeling like an outsider. The workers began to nod at her in the mornings. Teresa saved her a spot at the lunch table. Even Miguel grudgingly admitted she worked hard, though he still gave her grief about the gate incident. And Evan Hale watched her. Not obviously. Not in a way that felt intrusive. But Maya was aware of him, appearing in the processing facility at odd hours, standing in the shadows observing the workflow, his green eyes tracking her movements with an intensity she didn't understand. On the 4th day, he finally spoke to her. Maya was working late, a voluntary extra shift because the harvest had been particularly heavy, when she realized everyone else had left. The facility was dim, only half the lights still on, and the silence felt heavy after the day's noise. She was wiping down her station when footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. "You don't have to stay late." Evan's voice came from somewhere to her left. "Carlos doesn't expect overtime from new hires." Maya didn't turn around. "I'm not doing it because it's expected. I'm doing it because there's work that needs doing. The work will still be here tomorrow. So will I." She finally looked at him. He stood maybe 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable in a way that suggested he rarely initiated conversations. "Is that a problem?" "No, it's just unusual." "Unusual how?" "Most people do exactly what's required and not a minute more. You do twice what's required and volunteer for extra." Evan tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Why?" "Because I need this job to work out." 1-month trial doesn't require this level of dedication. Maya set down her cleaning cloth and faced him fully. "You want honesty? I don't have the luxury of coasting. I have exactly 30 days to prove I'm indispensable. So when the estate changes hands in, 8 days now? Maybe the new owners will consider keeping me on. That requires being twice as good as adequate." Something shifted in Evan's expression. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. "You know about the deadline," he said quietly. "I asked around. People talk. And I'm good at reading between lines." Maya crossed her arms. "So yes, I know you're losing the estate. I know new owners are coming. I know everyone here is probably going to be looking for work soon. That's why I'm staying late. That's why I'm volunteering. Because when everything falls apart, I need to be the person they can't afford to lose." Evan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What makes you think the new owners will keep anyone?" "They won't. Not most of us. But they'll need someone who knows the operation, who can maintain continuity during the transition. I'm making myself that person. You've been here 4 days, which means I have 26 more to learn everything." Maya picked up her cloth again, went back to wiping down the station. "You can stand there and watch if you want, or you can tell me what I'm doing wrong so I can fix it. Either way, I'm finishing this section before I leave." She expected him to leave, expected him to retreat back into whatever shadows he preferred. Instead, he stepped closer and began helping her clean. They worked in silence for several minutes, the quiet broken only by the hum of machinery winding down for the night. Maya was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the careful precision of his movements, the way he cleaned like someone who'd spent years working these same stations. "You grew up here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And you'll lose it in 8 days." "Yes." That must be devastating. Evan's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. "It's a piece of land, property. It'll survive without me." "That's not what I asked." He didn't respond. They finished cleaning in silence. When they were done, Evan walked toward the exit, then paused and looked back. "The new owners won't keep anyone," he said quietly. "They're developers. They're going to subdivide the entire property and sell it off piece by piece. There won't be an estate to work at anymore. There won't be jobs to preserve." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You're sure?" "I've seen the preliminary drawings. They sent them to me last month. I think they thought I'd be interested in buying a parcel." His smile was bitter. "They're planning to start demolition the week after my birthday." So everyone here has 8 days of employment left. They just don't know it yet. Evan's voice was hollow. I'll tell them soon, tomorrow probably. They deserve time to look for other work. But yes, in 8 days, all of this disappears. He left before Maya could respond, his footsteps echoing away into the darkness. Maya stood alone in the silent facility, surrounded by the machinery and systems that had run for generations, and felt the full weight of what was coming crash over her. Not just her job disappearing, not just her own desperate situation, but 43 families losing their livelihoods, generations of work gone. A legacy erased because one man couldn't meet an impossible deadline. The unfairness of it made her angry in a way she hadn't felt in years. She walked back to her cottage through the dark groves, her mind racing. There had to be a solution, had to be something Evan hadn't thought of, some angle he hadn't considered. The universe didn't build something this beautiful just to let it die because of a technicality in a will. But by the time she reached her cottage, Maya still hadn't found an answer, just more questions, more impossible math. She was pulling out her laptop to update her spreadsheet when her phone rang. The hospital. At 9:30 at night. Her hand shook as she answered. Ms. Collins, this is Nurse Patterson from oncology. Your mother had a reaction to today's treatment. We had to intubate. She's stable now, but Dr. Okonkwo would like you to come in as soon as possible to discuss next steps. The world tilted. Maya gripped the edge of the table to stay upright. I'll be there in 40 minutes, she heard herself say. She drove to the hospital in a daze, breaking every speed limit, her mind blank with terror. Her mother was all she had left. The only person who'd never abandoned her, never given up on her, never stopped fighting. If she lost her mother, Maya would be truly alone. The thought was unbearable. Dr. Okonkwo met her outside the ICU at 10:15. His face told her everything before he spoke. The treatment is too aggressive for her system, he said gently. Her body can't handle it anymore. If we continue, we'll be causing more harm than good. So we stop? Maya's voice sounded strange, distant. We just let her die? We make her comfortable. We give her quality time instead of quantity. We let her spend her remaining weeks at peace instead of in pain. Weeks? Maybe a month. I'm sorry. Maya sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair outside the ICU and stared at the fluorescent lights and tried to process the impossible. All those hours working, all those spreadsheets, all that desperate calculation to find money that didn't exist. And it didn't matter. None of it mattered. Her mother was dying, and all Maya's stubborn determination couldn't change it. She didn't cry. She'd forgotten how. They let her see her mother at 11. She was unconscious, breathing through a tube, looking smaller than Maya had ever seen her. Maya sat beside the bed and held her hand and tried to remember the last time they'd had a real conversation. Last week? 2 weeks ago? She couldn't remember. The days had blurred together in an endless cycle of work and worry and bills. I'm sorry, Maya whispered. I'm sorry I couldn't fix this. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Her mother didn't respond, just breathed mechanically, kept alive by machines. Maya stayed until midnight when the nurses gently suggested she go home and rest. She drove back to the estate in numb silence, parked outside her cottage, and sat in the car staring at nothing. Tomorrow she'd have to be strong again. Tomorrow she'd have to work and prove herself and keep fighting. But tonight, just for tonight, Maya let herself break. She made it inside the cottage before the sobs came. Deep, wrenching sounds she barely recognized as her own. She collapsed on the floor and cried for her mother, for herself, for the impossible unfairness of a world where hard work and determination weren't enough to save the people you loved. She cried until there was nothing left. And then, because she had no other choice, she pulled herself together, washed her face, and tried to sleep. 4 hours later, her alarm went off. Time for another shift. Time to keep going. Time to pretend she wasn't falling apart. Maya dragged herself to the processing facility at 5, moving on autopilot. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her head pounded, and her hands shook with exhaustion. But she clocked in on time and took her place at the sorting line and began pulling defective olives like nothing had changed. Carlos noticed immediately. He pulled her aside during the first break. What happened? He asked quietly. Nothing. I'm fine. You look like you haven't slept in 3 days and someone died. That's not fine. Maya's composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for Carlos to see the truth. Family emergency, she managed. It's handled. Is it? It has to be. She straightened her shoulders. I can't afford to fall apart right now, so I'm not going to. Carlos studied her with those weathered eyes that had seen everything twice. Then he nodded slowly. Okay. But if you need time off, you tell me. Understood? This job isn't worth your health. Maya almost laughed. Almost told him that her health was the least of her problems, that her mother was dying and the medical bills would follow her for years, and she was about to lose this job anyway, when the estate dissolved and everything was falling apart faster than she could hold it together. But she just nodded and went back to work. She made it until lunch before Evan found her. Maya was sitting under the eucalyptus tree, staring at a sandwich she had no appetite for, when his shadow fell across her lap. Carlos said you had a family emergency. Evan's voice was careful, like he was approaching something fragile. Is everything all right? Maya didn't look up. Define all right. That bad? My mother's dying. The treatment failed. They're moving her to palliative care. The words came out flat, mechanical. So no, everything is not all right, but I'll still finish my shift. Evan was quiet for a moment. Then he did something completely unexpected. He sat down beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. I'm sorry, he said. Everyone's sorry. Sorry doesn't pay medical bills or buy more time. No, it doesn't. He was silent again, and Maya could feel him searching for words. When my mother was dying, people kept telling me to stay positive, to have faith, to believe in miracles. Like if I just wanted it badly enough, cancer would suddenly decide to be reasonable. Maya finally looked at him. His eyes were fixed on the distant groves, his expression distant. It made me angry, he continued quietly. The platitudes, the assumptions that I wasn't already doing everything humanly possible, that somehow her death would be my fault for not believing hard enough. What did you do? I stopped talking to people. Stopped letting them offer their useless comfort, just focused on being there for her in whatever time we had left. He glanced at Maya. I'm not saying that was the right choice, just that I understand the anger. Something in Maya's chest loosened slightly. Not much, just enough to breathe. I've been working 3 jobs for 18 months, she said. 60, sometimes 70 hours a week. Every penny going to treatments that were supposed to give her more time. And now they're telling me it was all for nothing. That I should have been spending time with her instead of killing myself trying to save her. You were trying to give her a chance to live. That's not nothing. It feels like nothing. I know. Evan's voice was soft. Believe me, I know. They sat in silence for a while, 2 people who understood loss in a way most people never would. Maya found herself grateful that he didn't try to fix it, didn't offer empty reassurances or suggest she take the rest of the day off. He just sat there, a quiet presence that somehow made the crushing weight slightly more bearable. Finally, Evan spoke again. How much time did they give her? A month, maybe. And the medical bills? Maya laughed, a harsh sound. Does it matter? I can't pay them regardless. I'll be dealing with debt collectors for the next decade, but at least she won't suffer anymore. That's something. How much? Excuse me? The bills. How much do you owe? Maya turned to face him fully. Why are you asking? Because I'm trying to understand the situation. The situation is none of your business. Fair enough? Evan stood up, brushing dust from his jeans. But if you decide it is my business, my office is in the main house. Top of the stairs, second door on the left. I'm usually there after 6. He walked away before Maya could respond, leaving her sitting under the eucalyptus tree trying to figure out what had just happened. Was he offering help? Pity? She didn't want either, didn't need either. She'd handled this the way she handled everything, alone, through sheer stubborn determination. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to. The rest of the day dragged like broken glass. Maya went through the motions, pulling defective olives while her mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios. Funeral costs, outstanding bills, where she'd go when the estate closed and she lost this cottage. Whether she'd end up back in her car, this time truly alone. By the time her shift ended at 6, she'd made a decision. She walked to the main house as the sun set, her heart pounding with something between hope and dread. The house was even more imposing up close. 3 stories of white stucco and red tile, with sprawling verandas and arched windows that probably cost more than Maya would earn in 5 years. She climbed the front steps and knocked before she could change her mind. Evan answered almost immediately, like he'd been waiting. "I owe $93,000, Maya said without preamble. "Medical bills, mostly, but also the personal loans I took out to cover gaps when insurance denied claims. My mother's final expenses will probably add another $15,000. I make $12.50 an hour here, which means even if I worked every hour of every day for the next 3 years, I'd still be underwater." Evan stepped back from the doorway. "Come in." The interior of this house was beautiful in a sterile way. Expensive furniture that looked uncomfortable, artwork that was probably valuable but felt cold, spaces so large they echoed. It reminded Maya of a museum, a place to observe, not to live. Evan led her through hallways that seemed to go on forever, past closed doors and empty rooms, until they reached what appeared to be a study. Dark wood, leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk covered in papers and ledgers. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from the desk. "Would you like coffee, water?" "I'd like to know why you asked about my debt." Evan sat down behind the desk, his expression unreadable. "Because I have a proposition. One that could solve both of our problems." "What problems? You're losing an estate. I'm drowning in medical bills. Those aren't related." "They could be." He leaned forward, his green eyes intense. "I need to be married with a child on the way by my 30th birthday. That's in 7 days. You need money for your mother's care and to clear your debt. I'm suggesting a business arrangement that addresses both needs." Maya felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "You're asking me to marry you?" "I'm proposing a legal contract, marriage in name only, for the purpose of satisfying the estate clause. In exchange, I pay off your medical debt and provide ongoing financial support." "And the child part?" Evan's jaw tightened. "That would be part of the arrangement, yes." Maya stood up so fast her chair scraped against the wood floor. "You're insane. You're actually insane if you think I'd agree to this." "Hear me out." "Hear you out? You want me to marry a stranger and get pregnant so you can keep your land? Do you understand how completely deranged that sounds?" "I understand it's unconventional." "Unconventional?" Maya's voice rose. "It's medieval. It's treating me like breeding stock. It's the kind of thing that happens in bad movies where the desperate girl has no other options, so she stopped, took a breath, realized with horrible clarity that she was, in fact, the desperate girl with no other options. Evan seemed to realize it at the same time. His expression softened slightly. "I'm not asking you to be breeding stock," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to be a partner in a business arrangement. Everything would be spelled out in a contract, your rights, your autonomy, your future security. You'd have complete control over your own decisions. Except the decision to not have a child with someone I barely know. Except that, yes." He stood up, came around the desk, but kept his distance. "I know how this sounds. I know what I'm asking is extreme, but I'm out of time and options, and you're the only person I trust to understand what's at stake." "Why me? You've known me less than a week." "Because you climbed a 12-foot gate to help someone you didn't know. Because you work harder than anyone I've ever seen for a job you knew might disappear. Because when I told you the estate was being demolished, you looked angry instead of relieved." Evan's voice was steady, but Maya could hear the desperation underneath. "Because you understand what it means to fight for something even when the odds are impossible." Maya sank back into the chair, her mind racing. This was crazy. Completely, utterly insane. You didn't marry strangers. You didn't agree to have children as part of a business transaction. You didn't— "How much?" she heard herself ask. "All medical debt cleared immediately. $25,000 for your mother's final expenses and funeral arrangements, plus a salary of $75,000 a year for the duration of the marriage, with a severance package of $200,000 if we divorce after the estate is secured." The numbers hit Maya like a physical blow. That was more money than she'd seen in her entire life, More money than her mother had earned in a decade. Enough to give her mother a dignified end. Enough to start over afterward, debt-free, with actual options. "And what do you get?" she asked quietly. "The estate. My home. The ability to keep 43 families employed. A legacy that doesn't end with me." "Just a legacy? Not a real family?" Something flickered in Evan's eyes. Pain, maybe, or longing, but his voice remained steady. "I don't know how to have a real family, but I can honor a contract, I can be fair, I can give you security and respect and everything spelled out clearly so there are no surprises." "What about the child?" "Raised here, on the estate. Full financial support, best schools, every advantage. You'd have equal say in all decisions regarding their upbringing." Evan paused. "And I swear to you, on everything I have, that child would never be used as leverage or treated as anything less than wanted. This isn't about creating an heir. It's about creating a future that includes more than just me." Maya closed her eyes. Her mother was dying. The bills were crushing her. This job would disappear in 7 days regardless. And here was a man offering her a way out, a strange, unconventional, slightly terrifying way out, but a way nonetheless. "I need to think about it," she said. "You have until tomorrow night. After that, there won't be enough time to make the legal arrangements." "Tomorrow night?" Maya stood up. "You're asking me to decide my entire future in 24 hours. I'm asking you to decide whether you're willing to take a calculated risk for financial security. That's different." "Is it?" Evan held her gaze. "I hope so." Maya left the main house feeling like she'd stepped into an alternate reality. She walked back to her cottage in the dark, her mind spinning through every angle, every consequence, every terrifying possibility. She could say no. Should say no. This was madness. But madness with a guaranteed paycheck. Madness that could save her mother's dignity and her own future. Madness that somehow made a twisted kind of sense when you were desperate enough. She spent the night staring at her laptop, running numbers that finally, for the first time in 18 months, actually worked. Medical debt? Cleared. Funeral expenses? Covered. Living expenses? Manageable. Future? Possible. All she had to do was marry a stranger and have his child. The universe had a sick sense of humor. At 3 in the morning, Maya pulled up everything she could find about Evan Hale online. There wasn't much, a few business articles about the estate's olive oil production, some mentions in agricultural journals, a brief obituary for his parents from 2012. No social media, no scandal. Just a man who'd inherited everything at 12 and spent the next 17 years maintaining it in isolation. She understood isolation, understood building walls to keep the pain out, understood the difference between being alone and being lonely, and how easy it was to confuse the two. By dawn, she still hadn't decided. She went to work at 5, moving through her shift in a fog. Teresa tried to chat with her during the first break, but Maya couldn't focus on small talk. Her mind was too busy calculating risk versus reward, obligation versus opportunity, fear versus pragmatism. At lunch, she drove to the hospital to see her mother. They'd moved her to a private room in the palliative care wing. She was awake today, though heavily medicated. Her eyes brightened when Maya entered. "Baby," she said, her voice weak, "you look tired." "I'm okay, Mom." Maya sat beside the bed and took her hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying." Her mother smiled slightly. "But the drugs are good, so I'm not complaining." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Maya studied her mother's face. The lines that had deepened over the past year, the gray hair that had once been as dark as Maya's, the hands that had worked so hard for so long and were finally, mercifully, getting rest. "I need advice," Maya said quietly. "About what?" "Someone offered me a job, a really good job. Excellent pay, benefits, security, but it comes with conditions that are complicated." "How complicated?" Maya hesitated, then, "Marriage and a child. It's a contractual arrangement, not a love match, but it would solve all our financial problems and give you proper care for however much time you have left." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she squeezed Maya's hand with surprising strength. "Is this man cruel?" she asked. "No, I don't think so. He's distant, maybe broken in some ways, but not cruel." Would you be safe with him? Physically? Yes. Emotionally? I don't know. We barely know each other. Her mother closed her eyes, thinking. When she opened them again, they were clear and focused despite the medication. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, she said, but the biggest one was teaching you that you had to carry everything alone, that asking for help was weakness, that you couldn't trust anyone to catch you if you fell. She brought Maya's hand to her lips, kissed it gently. You've spent your whole life being strong for me. Maybe it's time to let someone be strong for you, even if it's just a business arrangement. Mom, life is short, baby, shorter than any of us expect. If this man is offering you security and respect, and you trust him enough to honor his word, then maybe it's worth the risk. Maybe it's worth choosing something different than what you've always known. What if it's a mistake? Then you'll survive it. You always do. Her mother smiled. You're the strongest person I know. You can handle whatever comes. Maya stayed until visiting hours ended, holding her mother's hand and trying to memorize the feeling. Tomorrow, she might make a decision that would change everything. Tonight, she just wanted to be here, present, in this moment that would never come again. She drove back to the estate as the sun set, her mind finally settling into a strange kind of clarity. Her mother was right. She'd spent her whole life choosing the safe option, the isolated option, the path that required nothing from anyone else. And where had it gotten her? Alone, drowning in debt, working herself to death for problems that never got solved. Maybe it was time to try something different. Maybe it was time to take the risk. She went directly to the main house and knocked on the door at 7:15. Evan answered, looking surprised. I have conditions, Maya said without preamble. Something shifted in his expression. Hope, maybe. All right, can I come in? He stepped back, let her enter. This time they went to the living room instead of the study, a massive space with a stone fireplace and furniture that looked like it had been expensive 30 years ago and hadn't been updated since. Evan gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. First condition, Maya said. I want everything in writing, every promise, every obligation, every right and responsibility. I want a lawyer to review it, my own lawyer, not yours. And I want an escape clause if you violate any terms of the agreement. Agreed. Second condition, I make all medical decisions regarding the pregnancy and birth. No interference, no second guessing, no overriding my choices. Agreed. Third condition, after the child is born and the estate is legally secure, we maintain separate living spaces within the property. I'm not interested in playing house or pretending this is something it's not. Evan's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. Agreed. Fourth condition. The child is never under any circumstances used as a bargaining chip between us. Their well-being comes first, always, regardless of our personal relationship. That was already my intention, but yes. Agreed. Maya took a breath. Fifth condition. If at any point I feel unsafe or disrespected, I can end the arrangement immediately with full severance and child support guaranteed. Absolutely agreed. Sixth condition. You tell me the truth right now about why you're really doing this. Not the estate, not the legacy. The real reason you're willing to marry a stranger and bring a child into this arrangement. Evan was quiet for a long moment. He walked to the fireplace, stared at the cold stones, his back to Maya. Because I'm terrified of being alone, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Because I've spent 17 years in this house with nobody, convincing myself it was strength when it was actually cowardice. Because I'm about to turn 30, and the only legacy I have is property and money and nothing that actually matters. He turned to face her. Because maybe if I can build something with another person, even if it starts as a contract, I can prove to myself that I'm capable of more than just maintaining what my parents built, that I can create something new. The honesty in his voice cut through every defense Maya had left. Seventh condition, she said quietly. We don't lie to each other, ever. Even when the truth is ugly. Especially when the truth is ugly, Evan said. Agreed. Maya walked to where he stood by the fireplace. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the fear he was trying to hide. He was just as terrified as she was, just as desperate, just as willing to gamble everything on an impossible arrangement because the alternative was unbearable. If we do this, she said. We do it right. Legal marriage, actual commitment to making it work even if it's unconventional. I won't be a wife in name only who you resent and ignore. If I'm going to have your child, I need to know you'll be a present father, not a distant landlord. I can be present, Evan said. I don't know if I can be good at it, but I can try. Trying is all I'm asking. They stood there in the silent living room, two people about to make the strangest agreement of their lives, and Maya felt something shift. Not love. That would take time, if it happened at all, but maybe understanding, maybe respect, maybe enough to build on. I'll need to see my mother tomorrow, she said. To tell her in person. Of course, take whatever time you need. And I want the contracts ready by Thursday. My lawyer's name is Patricia Vance. She's done pro bono work for me before. She'll need copies of everything. I'll have Richard coordinate with her. When do you want to do this? The actual marriage? Evan's expression was grim. Friday at the latest. We need time to establish residency and conception dates for the legal requirements. The sooner we start, the better. Friday. Maya felt dizzy. That's 3 days from now. I know. I'm sorry for the timeline. Stop apologizing. We're both going into this with open eyes. She held out her hand. Business partners? Evan looked at her outstretched hand for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm, warm, steady. Business partners, he agreed. They shook on it, this impossible arrangement, and Maya felt the trajectory of her entire life shift in that moment. For better or worse, she'd just agreed to marry a stranger to save his estate and secure her future. She'd just agreed to bring a child into the world as part of a contract. She'd just chosen the wildest, most terrifying option available. And somehow, despite everything, it felt like the first truly honest choice she'd made in years. Maya spent Wednesday morning with her mother, explaining the arrangement in as much detail as she felt comfortable sharing. Her mother listened quietly, asked pointed questions about the contract terms, and finally gave her blessing with one piece of advice. Make sure he knows this child isn't just a legal requirement. Make sure he understands they're a person who'll need love, not just security. By Wednesday afternoon, Maya was sitting across from Patricia Vance, a sharp-eyed attorney in her 60s who'd helped Maya negotiate payment plans with various hospitals and collection agencies over the past year. Patricia listened to the entire proposal without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly concerned. This is insane, Patricia said when Maya finished. You understand that, right? This is absolutely insane. I know. You've known this man for 1 week. I know. You're agreeing to bear his child as part of a business transaction. I know. Patricia leaned back in her chair, studying Maya with the kind of intensity that made people confess things they'd planned to hide. Why are you really doing this? Because I'm out of options. Because my mother's dying and I can't give her the dignity she deserves without help. Because this estate employs 43 families, and if Evan loses it, they all lose their livelihoods. Because despite how crazy this sounds, I believe he'll honor the contract. Belief isn't enough when you're legally binding yourself to someone for the foreseeable future. Then what would be enough? Patricia sighed. Guarantees, protections, ironclad clauses that ensure you're not completely screwed if this goes sideways. She pulled out a legal pad. I'm going to draft an addendum to whatever contract his attorney proposes. You don't sign anything until I've reviewed it and we've negotiated terms that protect your interests. Understood? Understood. And Maya? Patricia's voice softened slightly. Make sure this is what you actually want, not just what you think you have to do. There's a difference. Maya thought about that on the drive back to the estate. Was this what she wanted? No. What she wanted was for her mother to be healthy, for medical debt not to exist, for the world to be fair and kind and reasonable. But the world wasn't any of those things, and wanting them didn't make them real. This was what she could have. This was the option available. And maybe that was enough. Thursday passed in a blur of contract negotiations. Richard and Patricia went back and forth for hours, arguing over clauses and contingencies, while Maya and Evan sat in separate rooms waiting for updates. By Thursday evening, They had a document that was 47 pages long and covered everything from financial obligations to custody arrangements to what happened if either party died before the estate was secured. Maya read every word twice. Then she signed it. Evan signed his copy in a different room. They didn't see each other until both documents were notarized and filed. "Friday at 10, Richard said as he packed up his briefcase. "City Hall, small ceremony, just the necessary witnesses. You'll need to bring identification and the marriage license we filed today." "That's it?" Maya asked. "That's all it takes?" "Legally, yes. Emotionally?" Richard shrugged. "That's between the two of you." After the lawyers left, Maya and Evan stood in his study, two people who'd just agreed to spend the foreseeable future together and had no idea what to say to each other. "Are you scared?" Maya finally asked. "Terrified," Evan admitted. "You?" "Same. We can still call it off. If you've changed your mind." "I haven't." Maya met his eyes. "Have you?" "No?" They stood in silence for another moment. Then Maya did something impulsive. She stepped forward and hugged him, just briefly, just a quick embrace that conveyed solidarity and shared terror and the weird comfort of knowing someone else was as freaked out as you were. Evan stiffened in surprise, then carefully hugged her back. "We're going to figure this out," Maya said quietly. "Somehow. I hope you're right. I'm always right about impossible things." That almost made him smile. Friday morning dawned clear and hot. Maya dressed in the only nice outfit she owned, a simple blue dress she'd worn to job interviews. No veil, no flowers, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was, a business arrangement that required legal formalization. Evan picked her up at 9:30, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her car. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd forgotten how formal clothing worked. They drove to City Hall in silence. The ceremony took 11 minutes. A board clerk read the standard vows. They both said, "I do," without inflection, and signed the marriage certificate with hands that shook slightly. Two strangers from Richard's office served as witnesses. Nobody smiled. Nobody threw rice. It was possibly the least romantic thing Maya had ever experienced. And just like that, she was married. Mrs. Maya Hale. The name felt strange in her mouth. Foreign. Like trying on someone else's identity. They walked out of City Hall into the brutal late morning heat, legally bound to each other, and Evan turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We still have to make this work." "I know, but still. Thank you for taking the risk." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. They drove back to the estate in continued silence, both processing what they'd just done. When they arrived, Evan pulled up in front of the main house instead of Maya's cottage. "There's something I need to show you," he said. He led her inside up the main staircase to the second floor, down a hallway she'd never seen before. He stopped at a door near the end and opened it carefully. Inside was a bedroom suite, sitting room, bedroom, private bathroom. It was clearly unused, dust covers on the furniture, but the bones were beautiful. Large windows overlooking the groves, built-in bookshelves, a fireplace, space that could be warm and comfortable if someone actually lived in it. "This was my mother's favorite room," Evan said quietly. "She spent her last months here because she could see the olives from the windows. After she died, I closed it up. Couldn't stand to look at it." He turned to Maya. "I had it cleaned yesterday. If you want to move in here instead of the cottage, it's yours. Separate space, like we agreed, but closer, more comfortable." Maya walked to the windows, looked out at the groves bathed in morning light. This was more space than she'd had in her entire adult life. This was comfort she'd never expected to experience. "I'll need to move my stuff," she said. "I'll help." "You don't have to." "I want to." Evan's voice was firm. "We're partners now. That means helping each other." So they spent Friday afternoon moving Maya's few belongings from the cottage to the main house. It didn't take long. She didn't own much. But Evan treated each item with respect, carrying her wobbly table like it was priceless, carefully transporting her laptop and files. By evening, Maya was settled into a space that felt both strange and right. She stood at the windows as the sun set, watching the groves turn gold, and tried to process everything that had changed in 1 week. 7 days ago, she'd walked 15 miles in brutal heat just hoping for a job. Now she was married, living in a mansion, legally bound to a stranger who'd just become the most important person in her life besides her dying mother. The universe definitely had a sick sense of humor. There was a knock on her door. Evan, looking uncertain. "I made dinner," he said. "Nothing fancy, just pasta. But I thought maybe we should eat together. Start building some kind of normal routine." "Normal?" Maya repeated. "Not sure that word applies anymore." "Probably not, but we can try." They ate dinner at the massive kitchen table, sitting at one end so they didn't feel quite so lost in the space. Evan had actually cooked, simple but competent. They made awkward small talk about the upcoming harvest, about Maya's plans to visit her mother tomorrow, about anything except the enormous decision they'd made that morning. After dinner, Evan cleared the plates without being asked. Maya helped him wash them. They moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning a new routine, trying to find a rhythm that worked. "This is weird," Maya said finally. "Extremely weird," Evan agreed. "But maybe weird is better than nothing." "Maybe." They finished the dishes in companionable silence. Then Evan did something unexpected. He pulled out 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. "To weird partnerships and impossible choices," he said, pouring. "To surviving whatever comes next," Maya added. They clinked glasses, this strange new partnership, and Maya felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty, not comfort, but maybe the beginning of possibility. Maybe that was enough. The first week of marriage was nothing like Maya had imagined marriage would be, back when she was young enough to imagine such things. There was no honeymoon, no romantic gestures, no pretense of affection. Just 2 people learning to exist in the same space without colliding, like planets orbiting the same sun at carefully calculated distances. Evan kept to his routines, up before dawn, walking the groves, checking on operations, retreating to his study for hours of paperwork. Maya kept to hers. Shifts at the processing facility, visits to her mother, evenings spent in her new room organizing the life she'd transplanted into this strange new reality. They ate dinner together most nights. That was the one routine they'd established together. A shared meal at the kitchen table, conversation that stayed carefully neutral. Weather, harvest projections, safe topics that required nothing vulnerable. But underneath the careful politeness, Maya could feel the clock ticking. They'd satisfied the marriage requirement. Now they needed to satisfy the other one. Neither of them mentioned it. On the 6th day of their marriage, Maya came home from visiting her mother to find Evan sitting on the terrace overlooking the groves, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and an expression on his face she'd never seen before. Raw, unguarded. "What happened?" she asked, stepping outside. "My birthday is in 3 days," he said without looking at her. 3 days to prove conception, or everything we did was for nothing? Maya sat down in the chair beside him. "We always knew the timeline. Knowing it and living it are different things." Evan finally looked at her. "I've been thinking about how to approach this. There's no good way. No way that doesn't feel clinical and wrong." "It is clinical. That's what we agreed to." "I know, but knowing it and accepting it are also different things." He set down his glass. "I don't want our child to be conceived out of obligation and desperation. I don't want to look back at this moment and feel nothing but relief that we met a legal deadline." "What do you want to feel?" Evan was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Something more than this." Maya understood. She'd been thinking about it too, lying awake in her beautiful room, counting down the days. They'd married to save the estate, but a child wasn't the estate. A child was a person who'd exist long after property lines mattered, a person who deserved better than being created just to satisfy a clause in a will. "We could wait," she said quietly. "See if the marriage itself is enough to challenge the clause." Richard might be able to argue, "He can't." "I already asked." "The will is specific, marriage and proof of conception or pregnancy by my 30th birthday. Both requirements, not either or." Evan's voice was flat. "We have 3 days. So we have 3 days to figure out how to do this in a way we can both live with." "Is there a way?" "I don't know, but we can try." They sat in silence as the sun set, 2 people trapped by circumstances neither of them had chosen, trying to find some thread of humanity in an impossible situation. Finally, Maya stood up. "I'm going to say something, and you're going to listen without interrupting. Agreed?" Evan nodded. We entered this arrangement as strangers conducting a business transaction, but over the past week I've watched you. I've seen how you treat your workers with respect, how you remember everyone's names and ask about their families, how you spent 40 minutes yesterday helping Miguel's daughter with her math homework because you overheard her struggling, how you visited Rosa twice to check on her knee even though she told you she was fine. Maya crossed her arms. You're not as empty as you pretend to be. You're not incapable of caring. You're just scared of it. What's your point? My point is that if we're going to do this, if we're going to bring a child into this world, we need to at least try to be honest with each other. Not just legally honest, but emotionally honest. Otherwise, we're just two traumatized people creating another traumatized person, and I refuse to do that. Evan stood up slowly. What kind of honesty are you asking for? The kind where you tell me what you're actually afraid of. The kind where I tell you what keeps me awake at 3 a.m. The kind where we stop pretending this is just a business arrangement and acknowledge that we're about to create a life together. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I. But we have 3 days to learn. Something shifted in Evan's expression. Not quite hope, but maybe the ghost of it. Okay, he said quietly. Where do we start? We start with dinner. Real dinner, not the polite stranger version. And we talk. Actually talk. No safe topics, no careful distance. Just two people trying to understand each other. That night they made dinner together. Evan chopped vegetables while Maya handled the pasta, and they moved around the kitchen in a dance that was becoming familiar. But when they sat down to eat, instead of the usual small talk, Maya asked the question she'd been holding back all week. Why did you really stay alone all these years? You're wealthy, you're not unattractive, you clearly have the capacity to care about people. So, why isolate yourself? Evan set down his fork. For a moment, Maya thought he'd refuse to answer. Then he exhaled slowly. Because everyone I've ever loved has left, he said. My father died when I was 12. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. One day he was teaching me how to graft olive trees. The next day he was gone. My mother lasted 3 more years before the cancer took her. And in between, I watched her waste away. Watched her try to stay strong for me while she was dying inside. His voice went rough. I learned that loving people means losing them. That opening yourself up means giving fate another target. So I just stopped. Stopped trying. Stopped reaching out. It hurt less. Did it? Maya asked quietly. Hurt less? No, but it hurt differently. Loneliness is predictable. Loss is devastating. Maya took a drink of water, gathering courage. My father left when I was 4. Just walked out one day and never came back. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, and I learned early that I couldn't be a burden. Couldn't need too much. Couldn't ask for help. Couldn't expect anyone to catch me if I fell. So I became self-sufficient to the point of isolation. Convinced myself I didn't need anyone. She met Evan's eyes. And then my mother got sick, and I realized I'd been lying to myself for 20 years. I needed her. I needed help. But I'd spent so long pretending I didn't that I'd forgotten how to ask. Is that why you agreed to this arrangement? Because you finally had to ask? Partly. But also because I recognized something in you. The same kind of loneliness I've been carrying. The same kind of fear dressed up as strength. Evan was quiet, processing. Then, what are you afraid of? Right now, in this situation? That I'll fail as a mother, the way I failed to save mine. That I'll pass on all my damage to an innocent child. That I'll be so focused on survival, I'll forget to actually live. Maya's voice dropped to almost a whisper. That I'll end up alone anyway, even in a house full of people. I'm afraid of the same things, Evan said. Except I'm also afraid I'll be like my grandfather, cold, distant, more concerned with legacy than with the actual people carrying it. That I'll create a child and still not know how to love them. Then we make a promise, Maya said. Right now, before anything else happens. We promise to keep trying, to keep being honest, to fight the instinct to close off and isolate. Not for the estate, not for the contract, but for the person we're about to bring into this world. Evan reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time they'd touched since their wedding day. His palm was warm, rough from years of working the land. I promise, he said. I promise too. They sat there holding hands across the dinner table, two broken people trying to build something whole, and Maya felt the first real stirring of hope. Not that everything would be perfect. It wouldn't. Not that they'd magically heal each other. They wouldn't. But maybe, just maybe, they could be honest enough to not make things worse. Maybe that was enough to build on. The next evening, Maya came home from the hospital with red eyes and a heavy heart. Her mother had been moved to comfort care. Days left, the nurses said. Maybe a week if they were lucky. She found Evan in the kitchen making tea, something he'd started doing in the evening since their conversation. He took one look at her face and set down the kettle. How bad? He asked. Days, maybe less. Maya's voice broke. She's asking for morphine around the clock now. The pain is too much. Evan didn't say anything. Just pulled her into a hug, the second one they'd shared. Maya stood rigid for a moment, then collapsed against him and let herself cry. Great, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal. Grief for her mother, for herself, for all the time they'd wasted being strong instead of being together. Evan held her through it all. Didn't try to fix it, didn't offer platitudes. Just stood there being solid and present while Maya fell apart. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her nose was running, and she probably looked like a disaster. Evan handed her a tissue without comment. I need to ask you something, Maya said, her voice hoarse. And I need you to be honest. Always. If we do this, if we try to conceive, there's a chance it won't happen in time. Bodies don't follow deadline schedules. We could do everything right and still fail. She looked at him directly. What happens then? When you lose the estate anyway? Evan was quiet for a long moment. Then, we figure it out together. The contract guaranteed you financial security regardless of whether the estate is saved. That doesn't change. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking what happens to us, to this partnership we're building. What do you want to happen? Maya realized she didn't have an easy answer. A week ago, she would have said she'd take the money and disappear, start over somewhere new. But now, standing in this kitchen with this man who'd held her while she cried, she wasn't sure she wanted to disappear anymore. I don't know, she admitted. But I think I'd like to find out. Something in Evan's expression softened. So would I. Even if the estate is gone? The estate is just land. What we're building, whatever this is, that's something different. Maya nodded, feeling something settle in her chest. Okay, then. Okay? That night, for the first time, they stayed up talking until past midnight. Real talking, the kind that required vulnerability and trust. Evan told her about his childhood, about growing up with parents who loved him but were consumed by maintaining the estate, about feeling like a caretaker for history instead of a son, about the crushing weight of expectation and the isolation it created. Maya told him about the years in the car, about learning to be invisible in school so nobody asked questions about her home life, about the grinding poverty that became background noise, about meeting her mother's cancer diagnosis with a weird kind of relief because at least it was a concrete problem she could fight, unlike the shapeless anxiety of just trying to survive. They shared their damage like trading cards, each revelation making them slightly less strange to each other. I think we're more similar than either of us wanted to admit, Evan said finally. Misery loves company? Something like that. He smiled slightly. Though I'd like to think we're building towards something better than shared misery. Like what? I don't know yet, but I'm willing to find out. The next day was Sunday. Evan's birthday was Monday. 24 hours to satisfy a requirement that couldn't be forced or faked. They spent the morning in careful silence, both aware of the deadline but neither willing to acknowledge it directly. Maya visited her mother for what she knew might be the last time. Her mother was barely conscious, but she squeezed Maya's hand when she spoke. Be happy, baby, her mother whispered. Stop carrying everything alone. I'm trying, Mom. Good. That's good. Maya stayed until her mother drifted back to sleep, then drove home with tears streaming down her face. Not just grief, but gratitude. Her mother had given her permission to let go, to stop fighting alone, to accept that needing someone wasn't weakness. She found Evan on the terrace again, staring at the groves in the golden afternoon light. Tomorrow's your birthday, Maya said, sitting beside him. Yes. And we're out of time. Yes. Are you ready? Evan turned to look at her, really look at her, with an intensity that made Maya's breath catch. Are you? I don't think anyone's ever ready for something like this, but I'm willing. Willing isn't the same as wanting. No, but it's honest. Maya took his hand. I'm not going to pretend I'm madly in love with you. We both know that's not what this is. But I respect you. I trust you. And I think maybe that's a better foundation than passion anyway. You think? I hope. She squeezed his hand. All we can do is try to be better than our worst fears, to create something good even if it starts from desperation. Evan brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Then let's try. They went inside as the sun set, two people about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. The clinical precision they'd imagined was gone, replaced by something gentler, more human. They moved slowly, carefully, treating each other with a tenderness that surprised them both. It wasn't passionate, it wasn't romantic, but it was honest and respectful and maybe, in its own way, hopeful. Afterwards, they lay in the darkness of Evan's room, the first time Maya had been there, and didn't speak. Just existed together in the quiet, processing what they'd done. Are you okay? Evan finally asked. I think so. You? Yeah, I think so too. This doesn't change the contract. We're still business partners. I know. But maybe we're also something more now. Maybe, Evan agreed quietly. Maya fell asleep there, in his bed, and woke before dawn to find Evan already awake, staring at the ceiling. Happy birthday, she said softly. Thank you. How old are you today? 30, officially an adult who met impossible deadlines. We don't know if we met them yet. Conception isn't instant. I know, but we tried. That has to count for something. They lay there in the pre-dawn darkness, and Maya felt the strangest sense of peace. Whatever happened now, whether her body cooperated with the timeline, whether the estate was saved, whether this bizarre arrangement evolved into something real, they'd done what they could. The rest was out of their hands. Evan spent his birthday working like any other day. Maya went to the hospital, sat with her mother, and tried to memorize every detail. The shape of her hands, the sound of her breathing, the way she smiled even in sleep sometimes, like she was dreaming of better days. That evening, Richard arrived with news. The cousins are coming tomorrow, he said grimly. They've heard about the marriage, and they're bringing their lawyers. They're going to challenge the validity. On what grounds? Evan asked. They'll argue it's a sham marriage, a last-minute arrangement designed to circumvent the spirit of the will. And honestly, they're not entirely wrong. The will doesn't specify the marriage has to be for love, Maya said, just that it has to be legal. They'll argue intent. They'll depose you both, dig into how you met, why you married. If they can prove it was purely transactional, a judge might rule in their favor. Evan's jaw tightened. So even if we satisfied the technical requirements, we could still lose. Yes. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated this. After Richard left, Evan and Maya sat in the study in stunned silence. We did all of this for nothing, Evan said finally. We don't know that yet. They're going to tear us apart in depositions, make us look like frauds. Then we don't lie. Maya stood up, pacing. We tell the truth. That yes, we married to save the estate, but also that we chose each other. That we could have found anyone desperate enough, but we chose someone we respected, someone we thought we could build something with. You think that'll be enough? I think it has to be, because it's all we have. The next day, the cousins arrived with an army of lawyers. Gerald and Marjorie Hale, distant relatives Evan had met exactly twice, both times at funerals. They swept into the main house like they already owned it, their attorneys spreading documents across the dining room table. This marriage is a farce, Gerald said without preamble. You married a woman you'd known for less than 2 weeks to circumvent the clear intent of your grandfather's will. I married someone I chose to build a life with, Evan said evenly. The timeline was compressed, yes, but the commitment is real. Is it? Or is it a contract with a financial incentive? Marjorie's smile was sharp. We've done our research, Evan. We know all about Maya's medical debt, about her dying mother, about how convenient your proposal must have seemed. Maya felt rage building in her chest. You don't know anything about me. don't we? You're a woman who is desperate enough to marry a stranger and agree to bear his child for money. That's not a wife. That's a business transaction. Then so is most of human history, Maya shot back. Marriages have been business arrangements since the beginning of civilization. Love is the modern exception, not the rule. But your grandfather's will specified legitimate marriage, one of the lawyers interjected, which implies genuine intent to build a family. We have genuine intent, Evan said. We're building exactly what my grandfather wanted, a future for this estate that includes more than just property. Prove it, Gerald said. Prove this isn't just an elaborate scheme to cheat us out of what's rightfully ours. The depositions began that afternoon. Maya went first, sitting across from 3 hostile attorneys who asked invasive questions about her relationship with Evan, her financial situation, her motivations for marriage. When did you first meet Mr. Hale? August 21st? And you married him on August 28th, 7 days later. Yes. Isn't that extraordinarily fast? It's fast, not extraordinarily so. People have married faster for better and worse reasons. What were your reasons? Maya took a breath. I needed financial security. My mother is dying and I was drowning in medical debt. Evan offered a solution. So you married him for money. I married him because he offered me respect, honesty, and a partnership I could live with. The money was part of it, yes, but so was the chance to be part of something meaningful. Something meaningful like inheriting a multi-million-dollar estate. Something meaningful like preserving 43 jobs and maintaining a legacy that matters to the community. Maya held the lawyer's gaze. Evan could have found anyone desperate enough to marry him. The fact that he chose me, that we chose each other, says something about what we're trying to build. And what about the child? Are you pregnant? I don't know yet. It's too soon to test. How convenient. How honest, Maya corrected. I could lie and say yes, by time, but we agreed to tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient. The lawyers exchanged looks. They'd expected someone they could intimidate, someone who'd crack under pressure. Maya gave them nothing but calm, direct answers. Evan's deposition was similarly brutal. They questioned everything, his judgment, his timeline, his true feelings about Maya. He answered with the same steady honesty. Do you love your wife? Evan paused. Maya held her breath, listening from the next room. I respect her, he said finally. I admire her strength and her honesty. I trust her with my future and the future of this estate. Love is a complicated word that means different things to different people. What I feel for Maya is partnership, respect, and the foundation of something that could become love if we're given the chance to build it. That seems more valuable than passionate romance that burns out in 6 months. The lawyers weren't satisfied, but they couldn't find anything to directly contradict the legitimacy of the marriage. The depositions ended after 6 hours. The cousins and their lawyers left with promises to be in touch, leaving Evan and Maya exhausted and emotionally raw. That was hell, Maya said, collapsing onto the couch. Agreed. Evan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. But you were incredible. The way you stood up to them, I just told the truth. Most people can't do that under pressure. You made it look easy. It wasn't easy. I just didn't have anything to hide. Maya turned to look at him. What you said about love, did you mean it? Yes. Does that bother you? No. It's actually the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, which is either very sad or very telling about my life choices. That made Evan laugh, a real laugh, and Maya realized it was the first time she'd heard the sound. It transformed his face, made him look years younger. We're going to be okay, she said. Whatever the lawyers decide, we're going to figure this out. You sound very certain. I'm not. But sometimes you have to fake certainty until it becomes real. 3 days later, Maya woke up feeling strange. Not sick exactly, just off, like her body was trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. She took the pregnancy test she'd bought the week before, the one that had been sitting in her bathroom cabinet like a ticking time bomb. 2 minutes later, she was staring at 2 pink lines that would change everything. She sat on the bathroom floor, test in hand, and felt emotions crash over her in waves. Fear, hope, terror, wonder. She was pregnant, actually pregnant, with a child who'd been conceived as part of a contract but would be born as a person with needs and dreams and the right to be loved unconditionally. She had to tell Evan. She found him in his study, surrounded by paperwork related to the legal challenge. He looked up when she entered, and whatever he saw on her face made him stand immediately. Maya? She held out the test without speaking. Evan took it, looked at the two pink lines, and went completely still. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he set the test down carefully and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I don't know. Are you?" "I don't know either." They stood there in his study, processing the reality that had just become concrete. A child. Their child. Real and growing and terrifyingly dependent on two people who barely knew how to take care of themselves. "The estate is saved," Evan said finally. "This satisfies the condition." "I know." "We should call Richard, get the documentation started." "I know." Maya, Evan's voice cracked slightly. "Are you happy about this?" Maya thought about it honestly. "I'm terrified, but also maybe a little bit hopeful. We're bringing a life into this world. That's huge and scary and completely overwhelming, but it's also maybe the first real thing either of us has done in a long time." "The first real thing," Evan repeated. "Yeah, that feels right." He crossed the space between them and pulled her into a hug. Maya wrapped her arms around him and let herself lean into his strength. They stood there holding each other, two people who'd married as strangers and were now bound together by something infinitely more permanent than a contract. "We're going to have to figure out how to be parents," Maya said against his shoulder. "I know. Neither of us has any idea what we're doing. I know that too. But we'll try, right? To do better than our worst fears?" "We'll try," Evan promised, every single day. They called Richard that afternoon. He was ecstatic, immediately beginning the process of documentation that would prove the estate clause had been satisfied. The pregnancy tests, doctor's appointments, everything legally necessary to demonstrate that Evan had met the requirements. The cousins and their lawyers fought anyway. They challenged the timing, the validity, the interpretation of the will. But the will was clear, and Evan had satisfied it. On September 15th, 3 weeks after Maya had walked through the front gate looking for work, a judge ruled in Evan's favor. The estate was saved. That night they celebrated quietly. No party, no champagne, just dinner on the terrace as the sun set, the two of them acknowledging what they'd accomplished. 43 families get to keep their jobs, Maya said. That's what matters most. You matter most, Evan corrected quietly. You and the baby. The estate is just the framework. Maya reached across the table and took his hand. When did you start thinking like that? When I realized what I'd been trying to save wasn't the land. It was the possibility of having a home again. A real one. With people who matter. Are we people who matter? You're the only person who's mattered to me in 17 years, so yes. 3 days later, Maya's mother passed away peacefully in her sleep. Maya was there, holding her hand, telling her about the baby she'd never meet. Her mother smiled at the news and whispered, "Be happy," one more time before slipping away. Evan helped Maya plan the funeral, handling details she was too grief-stricken to manage. He stood beside her at the service, his hand steady on her back when her knees threatened to give out. He drove her home afterward and made her tea, and didn't try to fix her grief with empty words. He just stayed. "Thank you," Maya said that night, curled on the couch with her head on his shoulder. "For being here. For not leaving me alone with this." "I'm not going anywhere," Evan said. "That's what partnership means." "Is that all this is? Partnership?" Evan was quiet for a moment. Then, "No, I think it stopped being just partnership somewhere between your first day and now. I'm not sure when exactly, but it changed." "Into what?" "I don't know yet, but I'd like to find out." Maya closed her eyes, exhausted and heartbroken and strangely hopeful all at once. Her mother was gone. The estate was saved. She was pregnant with a child who'd been conceived from desperation, but would be born into something that felt increasingly like possibility. The universe still had a sick sense of humor, but maybe this time the joke was on their side. The weeks after the funeral blurred together in a haze of grief and adjustment. Maya moved through her days mechanically, her body changing in ways she wasn't ready to acknowledge while her heart struggled to process a loss that felt both inevitable and impossible. She'd known her mother was dying for months, had prepared herself as much as anyone could, but the finality of it still knocked the air from her lungs every morning when she woke up and remembered. Evan didn't try to fix it. He just showed up. Made breakfast when Maya couldn't face food, sat with her in silence when words felt like too much effort, drove her to doctor's appointments and held her hand when the ultrasound technician showed them a tiny flutter on the screen that would become their child. 8 weeks? The technician said cheerfully. Everything looks perfect. Due date is late April. Maya stared at the grainy image, trying to connect it to the abstract concept of a baby. A person. Someone who would call her mother and have no idea how terrified she was of failing them. You okay? Evan asked quietly as they drove home. No, but I will be. You don't have to be okay all the time. I know, but being not okay feels dangerous. Like if I let myself feel everything, I'll never stop falling apart. Evan pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her. Then fall apart. I'll catch you. That's what I'm here for. Something in Maya's chest cracked open. She'd spent her entire life convinced that falling meant hitting the ground alone, that showing weakness meant being abandoned. But Evan was offering something different, not rescuing. She didn't need that. Just presence. Just the promise that she didn't have to carry everything alone anymore. She cried in the car on the side of the county road, and Evan held her until the storm passed. When she finally pulled back, exhausted and raw, he handed her a tissue and asked if she wanted ice cream. It's 10 in the morning, Maya said. Is that a no? That's a yes. Definitely a yes. They got ice cream and sat in the park watching kids play on the swings, and Maya felt the first stirring of something that might eventually become healing. Not yet, not today, but someday. The estate settled into new rhythms. With the legal challenge resolved, Evan began making changes he'd been planning for years, but never had the security to implement. He expanded the workers' benefits, upgraded equipment, started a profit-sharing program that gave employees stake in the harvest's success. Maya watched him transform from a solitary caretaker into an actual leader, someone people came to with ideas instead of just problems. She also watched the estate transform him. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, started eating lunch with the workers instead of hiding in his study. The walls he'd built didn't come down all at once, but they developed windows, doors, places where people could reach him. You're different than you were 2 months ago, Maya said one evening as they prepared dinner together. It had become their routine, cooking side by side, moving in a dance that was increasingly natural. So are you, Evan replied. How am I different? You let people help you now. You didn't before. Maya thought about that. He was right. When Rosa brought over casseroles now, Maya accepted them with gratitude instead of guilt. When Teresa offered to drive her to doctor's appointments, she said yes instead of insisting she could manage alone. When Evan asked how she was feeling, she told him the truth instead of deflecting with, I'm fine. You made it safe to need people, she said quietly. You didn't run when I fell apart. That's new. For me too. Evan set down the knife he'd been using to chop vegetables. I spent 17 years convinced that needing people would destroy me, that the only safe option was complete independence. And then you showed up and crashed through every defense I had. And somehow I'm still standing. Better than standing, actually. Better how? I'm living instead of just existing. There's a difference. Maya crossed to where he stood and wrapped her arms around him from behind, her head resting against his shoulder. He covered her hands with his, and they stood there in the kitchen, letting the moment settle. When did this stop being just a contract? Maya asked. I don't think it ever was. We just pretended it was because that felt safer. And now? Now I think we're building something real. Something that started from desperation, but grew into choice. Maya turned him around to face her. I choose you, not because of the contract or the estate or the baby. I choose you because you're kind and honest and you make me believe in possibilities I stopped believing in years ago. Evan cupped her face in his hands, his green eyes intense. I choose you too. Every day. For the rest of however long we get. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the careful, clinical intimacy that had satisfied the estate clause. This was warm and genuine and full of emotion they'd both been too scared to name. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Maya realized she was smiling. "Was that our first real kiss?" she asked. "I think so. How was it?" "Pretty good for a fake husband. Pretty good for a fake wife." They finished making dinner with hands that kept finding excuses to touch, stealing glances and smiling like teenagers. Later, lying in bed together, they'd stopped maintaining separate rooms somewhere around week 3. Maya stared at the ceiling and tried to pinpoint when exactly friendship had shifted into something deeper. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she said into the darkness, which wasn't part of the plan. Evan rolled onto his side to face her. Good plans adapt to new information. "Is that your way of saying you feel it too?" "That's my way of saying I think I've been falling since you climbed that gate to help Rosa. I just didn't have the vocabulary to recognize it. And now? Now I think love might be the only word that fits." Maya reached for his hand, threading their fingers together. "This is terrifying." "Completely." "But also good?" "Also good," Evan agreed. They fell asleep like that, hands linked, choosing each other in ways that had nothing to do with contracts or clauses or anything except the simple truth that together felt better than apart. As Maya's pregnancy progressed, the estate transformed around them. Word spread about the profit-sharing program and the benefit improvements, and suddenly workers who'd been considering leaving stayed. Young people who'd grown up on the estate and moved away started coming back, bringing fresh ideas and energy. The processing facility ran more efficiently. The olive oil won awards. The land that had been maintained out of obligation began thriving under actual care and attention. Carlos pulled Evan aside one afternoon in late October. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. The workers actually trust you now. They bring their families to the harvest celebrations. They talk about the estate like it's theirs too, not just yours." "That's because it is theirs too," Evan said. "I'm just the one whose name is on the deed. Your grandfather would be proud, not of the estate, of you, for figuring out what really matters." Evan thought about that conversation later, sitting with Maya on the terrace watching the sunset. His grandfather had written that clause to force him into creating a family, into building something beyond just property. The old man had been manipulative and heavy-handed about it, but maybe also right. "What are you thinking about?" Maya asked, her hand resting on the small bump that was becoming increasingly visible. "My grandfather. How much I resented him for that clause, but also how maybe he understood something I didn't." "Which was? That land without people is just dirt. Legacy without relationship is just ego. He wasn't trying to preserve the estate. He was trying to preserve me from becoming so isolated I forgot how to be human." "Did it work?" "You're here, aren't you?" "I'd say it worked." Maya leaned against him, comfortable in a way that still occasionally surprised them both. "I've been thinking about names." "For the baby?" "Obviously for the baby, unless you want to name the estate." "The estate already has a name. What names are you thinking?" "For a girl, maybe Iris. It was my mother's middle name. For a boy, I'm not sure yet." "Iris Hale." Evan tested the sound. "I like it. What about middle names?" "That's where you come in. Your family should be represented too." They spent the evening trading possibilities, building a list of names that honored both their histories while creating something new. It felt important, this act of naming, like officially acknowledging that this child would be theirs, not just a legal requirement, but a wanted person with their own identity. By November, Maya had fully integrated into the estate's operations. She'd moved from the processing line to administrative work, her sharp mathematical mind proving invaluable in optimizing production schedules and identifying cost savings. Evan had insisted on creating an actual position for her, estate operations manager, with a salary that had nothing to do with their marriage contract and everything to do with her actual value to the business. "You didn't have to do this," Maya said when he showed her the formal offer letter. "Yes, I did. You've earned this position 3 times over. The fact that you're my wife is irrelevant to your job performance. Some people will say I only got it because I'm married to the owner. Let them say it. Everyone who actually works here knows the truth. You've transformed operations in 3 months. You've found inefficiencies that have been bleeding money for years. You've improved worker satisfaction by actually listening to their concerns. That's not nepotism. That's competence. Maya accepted the position and threw herself into the work with characteristic intensity. But Evan noticed she was also learning balance. She took breaks. She delegated. She asked for help when she needed it. The woman who'd worked herself to collapse on her first day had learned that sustainability mattered more than martyrdom. In early December, they attended their 20-week ultrasound together. The technician moved the wand across Maya's belly, pointing out features on the screen. There's the spine, the heart chambers, 4 healthy limbs. Would you like to know the sex? Maya looked at Evan. They discussed this. She wanted to know. He was ambivalent. They'd agreed she got the deciding vote since she was the one growing the human. Yes, Maya said. We want to know. Congratulations, you're having a boy. A son. Evan felt the words settle into his chest with unexpected weight. He was going to have a son, a boy who would grow up on this estate, who would run through these groves, who would have the childhood Evan had lost too early, a person who would need teaching and guidance and unconditional love. The responsibility was staggering. You okay? Maya asked in the car afterward. I'm terrified I'll mess him up, that I'll be distant like my grandfather, or absent like your father, or somehow combine the worst of both our histories into one spectacular failure of parenting. You want to know what I think? Always. I think anyone who's that worried about being a bad parent is probably going to be a decent one. It's the people who think they have all the answers who usually screw everything up. That's a low bar. It's a realistic bar. We're not going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes, but we'll try to fix them, and we'll keep showing up. And that's more than either of us had growing up. It's enough. Evan reached across the console and took her hand. When did you get so wise? Somewhere between climbing your gate and agreeing to marry you. Desperation clarifies things. They spent December preparing, converting one of the upstairs bedrooms into a nursery, reading parenting books that made them both anxious, taking birthing classes where they were surrounded by couples who'd planned their pregnancies and seemed to know what they were doing. Evan and Maya sat in the back row holding hands and trying not to feel like complete imposters. Everyone here looks so prepared, Maya whispered during a break. They're faking it, same as us. You think? I know. Nobody actually knows what they're doing. They just pretend until it becomes real. Like we did with being married. Exactly like that. And look how that turned out. Maya smiled. Not terrible. High praise from my wife. Your actual wife, not your contract wife. There's a difference. When did the transition happen? Probably somewhere around the time you held me while I cried about my mother and didn't try to fix it with useless platitudes. Or maybe when you started asking my opinion on estate decisions. Or when you kissed me like you meant it instead of like you were satisfying an obligation. She leaned her head on his shoulder. It was a lot of small moments that added up to something bigger. I'm glad they did. Me too. Christmas arrived with unexpected joy. They hosted a celebration for all the estate workers and their families, a tradition Evan's grandfather had started decades ago, but that had lapsed after his parents died. The main house filled with laughter and children and the smell of food prepared by a dozen different families sharing their cultural traditions. Rosa presided over everything like a benevolent queen, her knee fully healed, making sure everyone felt welcome. Evan found himself in the kitchen at one point surrounded by people, helping to plate food and manage chaos, and realized he was happy. Actually, genuinely happy in a way he hadn't been since before his father died. His house was full. His life was full. He had a wife he loved and a son on the way, and 43 families who trusted him to do right by them. He'd built something real. Maya appeared beside him, handing him a plate. You're smiling. I have a lot to smile about. Yeah, you do. She kissed his cheek. Thank you for this. For bringing back the tradition. For making this place feel like home instead of just a house. Thank you for showing me how. They stood in the crowded kitchen, surrounded by noise and chaos and life, and Evan felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. 6 months ago, he'd been alone, counting down to losing everything. Now he had more than he'd ever imagined wanting. The universe had a sick sense of humor, but sometimes it also had impeccable timing. January brought rain and renewed energy. The groves needed the water, and the workers celebrated every storm. Maya entered her third trimester, her body transforming in ways that were both miraculous and uncomfortable. Evan became an expert at back rubs and midnight snack runs, at knowing when she needed space and when she needed company. "I'm enormous," Maya complained one evening, struggling to find a comfortable position on the couch. "You're pregnant. There's a difference. I can't see my feet. I can't sleep. I can't do simple tasks without getting winded. This is ridiculous." "It's also temporary. 3 more months and you get to hold him instead of carry him." 3 more months feels like forever. Evan pulled her feet into his lap and started massaging them. "Want me to tell you something that'll make you feel better or worse?" "Better. Definitely better. I think you're beautiful. More beautiful now than the day we got married. You're growing our son, creating life, doing something impossible with grace and strength. That's not ridiculous. That's extraordinary." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. Pregnancy hormones made her cry at everything these days, but this was different. This was the man she'd married as a stranger telling her she was extraordinary while rubbing her swollen feet like it was a privilege instead of a chore. "I love you," she said, "in case I haven't said it enough lately." "You say it every day." "Well, I'm saying it again. I love you. I love this life we're building. I love that our son is going to grow up here with people who care about him. I love that we took something desperate and turned it into something good." Evan leaned forward and kissed her, careful of her belly. "I love you too. All of you. Including the parts that complain about being enormous. Those are the best parts. Obviously." February arrived with the first signs of spring. The olives began flowering, tiny white blossoms that would eventually become next year's harvest. Evan walked the groves with Carlos, discussing expansion plans and investment strategies, building 5-year projections that included profit sharing and sustainability initiatives. "You're thinking long-term now," Carlos observed. "That's new." "I have reasons to think long-term. A son on the way. A wife who believes in this place. Workers who actually care about making it succeed. Why wouldn't I plan for the future? Your grandfather would approve. Not the old version who wrote that clause, the version I remember from when I first started here. The one who believed estates should serve communities, not the other way around." Evan thought about that. His memories of his grandfather were complicated. The distant patriarch who'd valued legacy over relationship, who'd created the clause that had forced Evan's hand. But maybe there had been more to him. Maybe he'd understood that forcing Evan to build a family was the only way to save him from isolation. "I'm thinking about starting a foundation," Evan said, "using estate profits to support agricultural education, sustainable farming practices, worker development programs. Make this place about more than just producing olive oil." "That's ambitious." "I have an ambitious wife who keeps pushing me to think bigger. She's been researching models from other estates, building financial projections, talking to workers about what would actually be useful. I figure if I'm going to plan for my son's future, I should plan for everyone's kids' futures too." Carlos clapped him on the shoulder. "You've come a long way from the kid who hid in his study avoiding everyone." "I had good motivation to change. Love usually is good motivation." March brought preparation. They finished the nursery, soft green walls, furniture assembled after several arguments about instructions, a rocking chair positioned by the window overlooking the groves. Maya washed tiny clothes and folded them into drawers, marveling at how something so small would soon be a person. Evan installed a car seat and practiced buckling an imaginary baby until he could do it in under 30 seconds. He read parenting books with the same intensity he'd once reserved for agricultural journals. He made lists of pediatricians and emergency contacts and backup plans for every scenario he could imagine. "You're spiraling," Maya said, watching him reorganize the diaper-changing station for the 3rd time. "I'm preparing." "You're panicking." "Can I do both?" Maya waddled over. She'd given up pretending she could still walk normally, and wrapped her arms around him. "He's going to be fine. We're going to be fine. You don't have to have everything perfect before he arrives." "I want to give him better than what I had." "You already are. You're present, you care, you're trying. That's more than either of us had growing up." She rested her head against his chest. And when we inevitably screw something up, we'll apologize and try to fix it and keep loving him anyway. That's what makes good parents, not perfection, but commitment. You're really good at the pep talks now. I've had practice. You spiral a lot. Fair point. The due date came and went with no signs of labor. Maya walked the groves in the spring sunshine, trying to coax their son into arriving. Evan hovered anxiously, ready to race to the hospital at the first contraction. The workers placed bets on the birth date and weight, Rosa presiding over the informal pool with stern authority. He'll come when he's ready, Rosa told Maya. Babies have their own schedule. I'm ready for him to be ready. First babies are always late. They like to make you wait. 4 days after the due date, Maya woke at 3 in the morning with the first contraction. She timed them for an hour before waking Evan, not wanting to rush to the hospital too early. By 6, they were coming every 5 minutes, and Evan was in full panic mode. Hospital, now. We need to go now. We have time. Your water could break. You could have complications. We need medical professionals. Now. Maya let him panic while she calmly gathered the hospital bag they'd packed 3 weeks ago. The drive to the hospital was tense, Evan gripping the wheel like his life depended on it, while Maya breathed through contractions and tried not to laugh at his intensity. They arrived at 7, got checked in by 8, and spent the next 11 hours in a labor and delivery room that alternated between boring and excruciating. Evan held Maya's hand through every contraction, got her ice chips, rubbed her back, and generally proved that his panic could be channeled into useful support when needed. You're doing great, he kept saying. You're required to say that, Maya gasped between contractions. You got me into this situation. Technically, we got each other into this situation. Remind me to punch you later when I'm not in active labor. At 7:43 that evening, after pushing that made Maya absolutely certain she was being torn in half, their son entered the world screaming his outrage at the transition from warm womb to cold air. The doctor placed him on Maya's chest, this tiny, wrinkled, furious person who was somehow theirs. Maya stared at him in wonder while Evan stood frozen beside the bed, tears streaming down his face. We made him, Maya whispered. We made him, Evan agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Their son, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, 20 inches long, with his mother's dark hair and what looked like it might be his father's green eyes, stopped crying and blinked up at them like he was trying to figure out these strange giants who kept making noise. Hi, Maya said softly. We're your parents. We have no idea what we're doing, but we promise to try really hard not to screw you up too badly. Evan reached out with one finger and touched his son's tiny hand. Immediately, the baby's fingers wrapped around Evan's, gripping with surprising strength, and something in Evan's chest cracked wide open. All the fear, all the uncertainty, all the careful defenses he'd spent years building, they shattered in the face of this overwhelming, terrifying, perfect love he felt for this brand new person. Hello, Julian, he said quietly. They'd chosen the name 2 weeks ago, Julian Hale, after Evan's father, but different enough to be his own. I'm your dad. I'm going to teach you about olive trees and how to be kind and that it's okay to need people. And I'm going to love you so much, it's probably going to embarrass you when you're older. That's my job. Julian yawned, unimpressed by the speech, but content in his mother's arms. They spent 2 days in the hospital, learning the basics of infant care from patient nurses who didn't laugh at their complete incompetence, or at least didn't laugh where they could see. Then they drove home carefully, Evan going 15 miles under the speed limit, despite Maya's insistence they'd be fine at normal speeds. The estate welcomed them back with celebration. Rosa had organized a small gathering, nothing overwhelming, just a few close workers and their families bringing food and gifts and offering congratulations. Julian was passed around carefully, admired and cooed over, while Maya and Evan sat on the terrace watching their community embrace their son. This is what family looks like, Maya said quietly. Yeah, it is. Not what either of us grew up with. No, better. They watched Teresa's teenage daughter hold Julian with surprising competence, watched Miguel's grandson stare at the baby in fascination, watched Rosa beam like a proud grandmother. Their son was being welcomed not just into a family, but into a community, into a legacy that was about more than property. That night, after everyone had left and Julian was finally asleep in his bassinet beside their bed, Maya and Evan lay in the darkness listening to their son's soft breathing. "We did it," Maya whispered. "We really did. The estate is saved. We have a healthy son. We built something real out of desperation and impossible deadlines. And we fell in love somewhere in the middle of it. That wasn't part of the plan. Best things never are." Maya rolled onto her side, careful of her healing body, and looked at Evan in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "If you could go back to August and tell yourself where you'd be in 9 months, would you believe it?" "Not even slightly. I'd think I was hallucinating." "Me too, single and drowning in medical debt to married with a child and a home, and a life that actually feels sustainable. It's absurd." The best kind of absurd. Julian made a small sound in his sleep, and they both froze, waiting to see if he'd wake. He settled back into quiet breathing, and they relaxed. "Thank you," Evan said quietly. "For what?" "For climbing that gate. For saying yes to an insane proposal. For taking a chance on a broken man who had no idea how to let anyone in. For building this with me. Thank you for seeing me as more than just someone desperate enough to agree to your terms. For treating me like a partner instead of an employee. For learning how to be present when your instinct was to hide." Maya reached for his hand. "We saved each other, I think. That's what partnerships do." "Is that what we are? Partners?" "Among other things. Husband and wife, co-parents, best friends, people who chose each other even when we didn't have to anymore. I like that last one best." "Me too." They fell asleep holding hands with their son breathing softly beside them. 3 people who'd found each other through desperation and built something extraordinary from broken pieces. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Julian proved to be a relatively easy baby, or at least easier than the horror stories they'd heard. He ate well, slept in reasonable stretches, and seemed content to be passed around the estate by workers who all claimed to be his favorite. Maya returned to work after 6 weeks, bringing Julian with her to the administrative office. Evan had converted a corner into a mini nursery, complete with a bassinet and changing station, because the idea of Maya being separated from their son for 8 hours felt wrong to both of them. She worked while Julian slept, took breaks to nurse him, and somehow managed to increase operational efficiency by another 12%. "You're making the rest of us look bad," Carlos teased, watching her create a new inventory tracking system while bouncing Julian on her knee. "I'm just optimizing systems that were already there, and Julian is excellent motivation to work efficiently so I can spend time with him." Still, impressive. Evan watched his wife juggle motherhood and management and marveled at her competence. He'd fallen in love with her strength first, but now he was equally in love with her tenderness. The way she sang to Julian in the middle of the night, how she narrated everything she did to him like he understood. The fierce protectiveness in her eyes when anyone suggested she was doing too much. "She's extraordinary," he told Rosa one afternoon, watching Maya show Julian the olive groves. "She is, but so are you." "Me?" "You let her in. That took courage you didn't know you had." Rosa patted his arm. "Your grandfather would be proud, not of the estate or the heir, of the man you became when you stopped hiding." By Julian's first birthday, the estate was thriving in ways Evan had never imagined. The foundation was established, funding agricultural scholarships for workers' children. 3 local farms had adopted their sustainability practices. The olive oil had expanded to national distribution. And most importantly, the 43 families who worked there felt like stakeholders instead of just employees. They celebrated Julian's birthday with a massive party that took over the main house and spilled onto the lawns. Children ran through the groves while adults ate and talked and celebrated. Julian, overwhelmed by the attention, clung to Maya while surveying his kingdom with solemn green eyes that were definitely his father's. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Evan said, holding his son while Maya cut the cake. "Hardest and best year of my life," Maya agreed. "Mine too." They'd learned so much in 12 months. How to function on 3 hours of sleep, how to change a diaper one-handed while eating breakfast, how to communicate in whispers and gestures so they didn't wake the baby, how to forgive themselves for mistakes and keep trying anyway. But they'd also learned how to be a family, how to make decisions together, how to support each other through exhaustion and frustration, how to laugh at the absurdity of their situation and love each other anyway. "What do you think?" Maya asked, watching Julian smash his hands into his birthday cake with unbridled joy. "Did we do okay?" "I think we did better than okay. I think we took an impossible situation and built something real, something good." He's going to ask about how we met someday, about the contract and the deadline and all the complicated parts. And we'll tell him the truth, that we started from desperation but chose to build something better, that sometimes the best things come from the hardest circumstances. Think he'll understand? Eventually, when he's old enough to appreciate that love isn't always neat or simple or romantic, that sometimes it's just two people deciding to keep showing up for each other. Maya leaned against Evan, watching their son celebrate his first year of life, surrounded by people who loved him. "I'm glad we showed up." "Me too." 2 years later, they stood in the same groves where Evan had once counted down to losing everything, watching Julian chase butterflies with the concentrated determination of a toddler on a mission. He was talking now, full sentences that were equal parts adorable and demanding. He knew the names of all the workers. He insisted on helping with everything. He was curious and kind, and occasionally stubborn in ways that reminded them both of themselves. "Another one," Maya said quietly. Evan looked at her, startled. "Another butterfly? Another baby. I'm pregnant again." The words hung in the air between them. This pregnancy wasn't required by any clause, wasn't part of a contract, was just two people who'd fallen in love deciding they wanted to expand their family. "On purpose?" Evan asked. "Very much on purpose." He pulled her into a kiss, deep and full of joy, while Julian demanded attention, and the grove swayed in the spring breeze. "We're doing this again," he said when they pulled apart. "We're doing this again. I love you. I love you too, so much." They watched their son play in the dappled sunlight filtering through olive trees that had stood for generations and would stand for generations more, and Evan felt the kind of peace he'd spent 17 years believing was impossible. He'd thought he was saving an estate. Instead, he'd saved himself. Maya had thought she was solving a financial crisis. Instead, she'd found a home. Together, they'd built something neither of them had known they needed. A family forged from desperation and choice and the simple decision to keep showing up for each other. The estate thrived. Their son grew, and two people who'd married as strangers became partners, parents, and proof that sometimes the universe's sixth sense of humor was actually a gift in disguise. On what would have been his grandfather's 100th birthday, Evan stood on the terrace overlooking the groves with his family beside him and his second child growing in Maya's belly, and he finally understood what the old man had been trying to do with that impossible clause. Not force an heir, create a legacy of connection instead of isolation. Not preserve property, preserve the possibility of love. "Thank you," Evan said quietly to the memory of a man he'd resented for so long. "You were right." Maya took his hand. Julian crashed into their legs, demanding to be picked up, and together they walked into the sunset over groves that had witnessed loneliness transform into belonging, desperation into hope, and a contract into the kind of love that lasted. The universe had a sick sense of humor, but sometimes, just sometimes, it knew exactly what it was doing.